Hi and welcome. This is Summer, your host with Pinnacle of Light. This is full disclosure with our special guest, Andrew Collins. He is an author and writer and a paranormal researcher and talks about many profound and mystical topics, such as Atlantis, the Watchers, Anunnaki, and the Nephilim. You can check out his work at andrewcollins.com. Andrew, you're here with us today and welcome. Thank you.
Yes, good day, summer. Here it is just beginning to get dark in England. Um, I should think it's a nice day wherever you are, but it's quite cold, but I'm ready to go. Happy to talk to you.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's pretty windy here today, and the clouds are pretty nice. But yes, welcome so much. I wanted to begin talking about um, a case you investigated. I guess an Avely abductions is what they call it. The Day family. You did help with some of the regression and some things that happened with that specific case. Could you tell some people and explain some of the things that happen that connects to the watchers and
Yeah,
that?
yes, absolutely. It we have to go back a very, very long time, back to 1977, and I was contacted by a family that lived at a place called Averley. Now that's in West Essex. It's just to the east of London, and just to the north of the Thames, River Thames. And this family were driving along a road in the evening on a short journey from the home of the parents of the woman in the car, Sue Day, and they knew the journey would take them around 20 minutes. So it was something that they did very, very regularly. So they knew the roads very well. They knew what time they would arrive home, and they had something they wanted to watch on television when they got back. And they were driving along, and there were three children in the car as well, all quite young. And two of the children were asleep, and one of the eldest, I can't remember the exact age now, but he was around 10. Um, was quite excited when the parents saw a strange light in the sky, which was a blue oval shaped light, and it was in the sky, and it seemed to be moving from left to right over their position. And they tried to evaluate what it was, couldn't find any explanation, and actually concluded it might be some kind of UFO. And it went out of sight, particularly as they went round the corners. There was quite a lot of trees and things like that in the way. And then the next thing that happened is that they went to round a bend in the road, and the car engine failed. The car radio began to smoke, and they had to turn that off quickly. They couldn't hear the sound of the tyres rolling over the road, and in front of them they saw a green bank or of mist or fog or gas that was luminous. And they went into this, and it was like reality suddenly stopped. They felt nauseous. They blacked out, and the next thing they know, they were three-quarters of a mile further on from that location, still in the car, still driving along. And one of the parents remembers turning around and saying to the son, "Are you okay? Is everybody here?" And they didn't really talk about what had happened, and after the journey, it was almost like it was sort of it was like they didn't know what had happened, so it was like there was nothing to talk about. So they got back to the house, turned on the television, and in those days, television generally went off the air around midnight or something, and the television was just blank. So they checked with the so-called speaking telephone, where you ring up and find the telephone, sorry, the time, and found that 3 hours were missing from their lives. This was also prior to the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, so that could not have influenced them as well. And so for the next 3 years, this it began in 1974, and for the next 3 years they just didn't do anything at all. But both of the parents experienced strange dreams of being inside a brightly lit room with entities, um, seemingly sort of over them, doing something to them. Almost as if they were like on an operating table in a hospital. And John actually described these entities as like gnomes, right? Gnomes are a form of little people, or elves or something like that that you get in British folklore. And yeah, that's the only way he could describe them. But he also felt that they weren't alone; that there were other entities there that were much taller. But I mean, that only really came out a little later. But they certainly had the dreams about these elves, or gnomes, and Sude also experienced like these visions of these ugly bat-like entities. Yeah, similar situation, but they were just fragmented. They didn't really understand what was going on. But eventually, the whole matter played on their mind so heavily that they contacted a UFO organization who put them in touch with myself and a colleague. And we immediately went round and interviewed the Day family, and spent hours with them, obviously, going over what had happened and realizing that they'd experienced what we now call a missing time episode of 3 hours, and that quite clearly this might relate to a UFO abduction experience. So, after 3 years, they contacted a UFO organization who put them in touch with myself, and I organized hypnosis for the man of the family, John Day, and he recalled what we'd know today as a on-board experience, where he was taken aboard this craft, and there were two types of entities which uh, seemed to examine him in a medical room, a brightly lit medical room, on an examination table. And the experience was very typical of an abduction, basically. And after the medical examination, they were shown around the craft, as it were, and they they were told various things. They saw like this video screen that flashed future events on in Earth's history in front of them. They were told about the home planet of these people and whatever. And eventually, obviously, the experience ends. And although it was only John that underwent the professional hypnosis, I actually conducted hypnosis with his wife, Sude, and she recalled something quite similar. But even by that time, she'd began to recall a lot more of the experience consciously. She didn't even need the hypnosis. And that was it, really. And I mean, I spent a lot of time with this family, uh, going round there probably every week on a Friday night and staying the night. And we would conduct hypnosis. We would do meditational exercises. We would watch for paranormal phenomena, and a lot of strange things occurred whilst I was staying there. I mean, for instance, one night I was staying on my own in the lounge of the family. The whole family was upstairs in their beds asleep, and suddenly, in the next room, which was the kitchen, I suddenly heard all these pots and pans starting to bang on their own, in a clear example of what might be called poltergeist.
Oh my.
And I mean, I was very young at the time, and it actually did scare me. And instead of investigating, I just hid under the covers. And I remember this really warm feeling rising up from my feet, going through my legs and through my body, and up through the head, as if something was trying to calm me. And after that, I felt okay, and I just fell asleep. And then on another occasion, I was in the same room, and it was just first light, probably sort of 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. Again, the family was asleep upstairs. The man of the house, John, was actually sleeping in a sleeping bag in the same room as me, with another friend of ours by the name of Barry King, because we'd done a night of investigations. And the door opened behind me, just gently opened behind me, and I saw this very tall entity standing behind me in the shadow, and I I sort of looked behind, I could see it, and then what happened is that this really pungent smell filled the air and filled my nose, and once again I had this sensation um, of calmness, and again I fell asleep and I woke up hours later, and everybody got up, and I recalled what had happened and was able to relate it to the family, and I'm certain, absolutely 100% certain, that this was nobody in the actual house. This was a tall person, a tall being, who was not any of the people in the house. And we both believe that the idea that these entities came from another planet is a little bit too simplistic. He feels that the experience was real, but it almost happened in some kind of parallel dimension, a parallel world, and that the 3 hours that went missing from their life, it's almost like they jumped space time. It's almost like they didn't spend them 3 hours somewhere else. It's like they were removed from our space time and put back down. And when they were put back down, in this space time, there was a time discrepancy of 3 hours. And that this suggests that what we're dealing with is entities who are more interdimensional than extraterrestrial. And that because the human race at this time finds it very difficult to understand that concept, from an acceptance level, what we believe we see are flying saucers that come from another planet, that fly from one star to another. And I'm afraid to say that that is a much too simplistic way of looking at it. I think we're dealing with entities that manifest into our own space time using certain mediums, and one of the mediums that they use is plasma. The green mist that the Day family encountered on the road was quite clearly a manifestation of plasma, and I think plasma is the key to understanding not just UFOs but also alien intrusions into our world.
That's very interesting. So basically, time missing, and I've heard of that before on other paranormal investigations, but I wanted to talk about a little bit with the watchers in the dream. So, what was the information that you had gathered from them about the watchers in this
Okay,
specific abduction?
yeah. Well, as I said, the both the Day family, the parents, John and Sue Day, suggested that there were two different types of entities that they encountered during this onboard experience. One were very small, with quite ugly bat-like features, who they referred to as the examiners, and present also were these extremely tall individuals, who looked quite like Caucasians or albino Caucasians, and they had steely eyes like albinos. They had quite long faces, and they referred to themselves as the Watchers. And this was the term that they initially used to refer to them. And I had no idea at this time that the Watchers were a form of human-like angel, described as extremely tall, with pale features, white hair, striking eyes, who are recorded in these this very strange religious text known as the Book of Enoch. And the Book of Enoch describes Enoch's encounter with this race of watchers who live in this heavenly environment on the top of a mountain. And some of their number are able to descend down into the villages of the mortal people and take wives, and they are said to have revealed to them the arts and sciences of heaven. And these arts and sciences sound very similar to the firsts for humanity that took place in an area of the globe we know today as the Near East or northern Mesopotamia, which is generally around southeast Turkey. And this is also the cradle of civilization. It's also the site of the biblical Garden of Eden, where obviously we have the story of Adam and Eve in the garden itself. But Eden was also said to be the home of the Watchers and the angels, that they seemingly lived out human like lives in this region, these, these strange looking shining ones. But coming out of the same area is the stories that we hear from Mesopotamian myths and legends of the so called Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are also described as having strange eyes, long serpent like features, living in this sort of kibbutz style communities in a sort of mountain like environment away from mortal kind. And all the evidence seems to suggest that the Watchers and the Anunnaki are one and the same. But in my opinion, the the Anunnaki and the Watchers are not aliens. I mean, they were born and bred in in this world. And why exactly the entities involved with the Aveley case should want to call themselves Watchers, as if they're almost like a sort of strange futuristic form of them, is a mystery. And it may even have been um, for us to make the link with the Watchers at that time, and to aid me, because many years later I would go on to write whole books about the Watchers as found within the Book of Enoch, and I would never forget the fact that John Day and Sue Day had called these entities that they'd encountered the Watchers. And I always wondered what the relationship between the two was. But the one thing I can say is that John received a series of dreams after I was in contact with him, where he felt that these Watchers had given our earliest ancestors knowledge and technologies which had allowed them to advance, quicker than the natural pace that they might have had without this intervention. Again, I don't necessarily see this as anything to do with aliens. I see it to do with our own ancestors and their interaction with these forces that we would call UFOs and the entities associated with them. And I think that this contact with these plasma, UFOs, which show intelligence and sentience and consciousness and are intelligences in their own right, and can appear to us in virtually any way which we perceive, has been going on for many, many thousands of years. I mean, perhaps, tens of thousands of years, possibly even earlier. It could even be that these life forms are older than biological life, and that they exist within plasma environments that manifest, within the environment or in the atmosphere or even outer space, and that it's a universal phenomena, and that within the plasma itself, which can take on quite physical forms, by the way, it's not simply some kind of nebulous light that we're seeing. It can take on a much stronger tangibility. That this could be the key to understanding our interaction with these trans-dimensional beings that exist out there and down here on Earth itself.
So, in your work, you've done with like the Sumerian tablets about the Anunnaki that they were physical beings that resided here on Earth and interacted with the people as well, sort of like Jesus or in the Vedas, like an avatar, so to say. Is that kind of
Yes, yes, sort of. I mean, I mean, obviously, the mention of Jesus there takes us back just 2,000 years. And I
Right.
think that the last of the Watchers probably it was around, I don't know, 1500 to 2000 BC. I think that they disappear from myths and legends and early history like that of the Bible around this time, never to return. But that suggests to me that whoever they were, they began to become totally integrated with our own ancestors to the point that they no longer existed as individuals. In other words, they lived on through us. You know, we are the descendants of the Watchers. We are the descendants of the Anunnaki. You know, their DNA, their genetic background is within us. And that's in many ways why we are attracted, or some of us are attracted to Watchers, and the Anunnaki are. I think the evidence suggests that, firstly, they gave us civilization. They help us build the earliest stone temple complexes in the area of southeast Turkey, like Göbekli Tepe, the
Hmm.
12,000-year-old site that was discovered only in the mid 1990s, just outside the city of Şanlıurfa in southeast Turkey, which I've written a book about, Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, that came out last year. Um, they allowed us to, to have this knowledge of how to create or supersize these religious structures that we now call temples or megalithic complexes. But that more than this, I think that they were hybrids. I don't, but not alien hybrids. The hybrids between our own ancestors, who were Homo sapiens, and the other distant cousins of ours, known as the Neanderthals. Now, the Neanderthals are seen as brutish, ugly, um, unintelligent, but all the evidence that's beginning to come out of genetics and archaeology tells us that they were as intelligent as their own ancestors, and that their connection with the other world, with dreams and sort of supernatural realms is probably the best way, was probably closer than that of our own ancestors. But that at a certain point, maybe around 50,000, 40,000 years ago, our ancestors interbred with them, creating a whole new mindset, and that we accelerated very, very quickly in certain regions of the globe, particularly in the area of Central Asia and also Russia, and that our ancestors began then to spread out with this new knowledge, and eventually ended up moving down at the time of a cataclysm, a comet impact event around 12,000 years ago, south, down between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, over the Caucasus Mountains of Georgia and Armenia, into the area that we now know as Turkey or Anatolia, and that they came in contact with the local people, and it was from this that Göbekli Tepe arose, and that whole culture surrounding Göbekli Tepe, and with it came the rise of civilization, and that these stories are remembered in these ancient texts as our trafficking with these human angels called Watchers, or these shining ones called Anunnaki. That's what I firmly believe, and that's the premise of many of the theories of my books. Like Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, but also a book I wrote as early as 1996, at the same time that Göbekli Tepe was being discovered, called From the Ashes of Angels, which people might like to check out.
You talk about the Watchers a little bit in that one, and the Ashes of the Angels.
The whole book is about the Watchers and the Anunnaki.
Oh, that's
And I, the stories that I that I'm telling you now are in that book. I mean, I'd worked out as far back as 1996 that the Watchers were human beings. They
Right.
were possibly slightly different to our own ancestors, but I couldn't work out at the time who exactly they were. And it wasn't really until about 2 years ago that I started to realize that they were human Neanderthal hybrids. And I found the evidence of this particular culture within the records of archaeology relating to the people that came into southeast Anatolia that kick-started the whole Neolithic revolution and are regarded as the builders of Göbekli Tepe. They were a particular culture known as the Swiderians, a very very advanced culture. Astronomers, shaman, um, traders. They were highly advanced, and they were
Yeah.
descendants of a high culture that existed as early as 30 or 40,000 years ago. Right at the time when our ancestors did interbreed with the Neanderthals, creating the hybrids that we exist. I mean, we're all hybrids within everybody that's come out of Africa, and their descendants, which would include ourselves. We have a very small percentage of Neanderthal DNA within us, which means that our ancestors, our direct ancestors, somewhere along the line, interbred with Neanderthals. And this is very exciting because I believe that what happened when this hybridization took place is it created an entirely new human creature, which is ourselves, really, us. We are the hybrids. We are the end product of that interaction with the Watchers and the Anunnaki. As I said,
So,
that's the reason why we are so interested in that subject today.
so you say that they messed with our DNA and that they were actual physical beings. So maybe them messing with our DNA had helped them incarnate through
No,
the
no,
pantheon.
not in my opinion. I don't think they messed with our DNA. I think that they simply interbred with us, um, to create hybrids. I don't believe that there was any kind of Zachariah Sitchin style breeding of humans inside test tubes.
Right.
I think that's fantasy, I'm afraid. And, was born out of Zachariah Sitchin's intuitive interpretations of Sumerian and Hebrew texts, which I've examined those same texts. Um, I even learned Hebrew to be able to read them in their original form. And as far as the Sumerian texts are concerned, I consulted every different available translation. And I'm afraid to say that a lot of what Zachariah Sitchin had to say, based on those interpretations, for me, is fantasy. I'm sorry.
Do you think that that was the interbreeding or the connecting, the hybridizing would be so that those beings' souls could incarnate in flesh through the pantheon for human evolution, that sort of thing? You said they were physical beings
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like here on
They were
Earth.
little different to you or I. They just looked striking. They looked different. They were extremely tall. They had very long jaws. They had probably quite prominent brow ridges. Um, they had high cheekbones. Their eyes would have been quite deeply set, so they would have looked very strange. They were probably a different colour to that of the natives of the region. I can't say exactly what colour. They could have been grey. They could have been blue, um, but we don't exactly know. But the accounts that we have in the Book of Enoch and in the accounts of the Anunnaki from Mesopotamian tradition keep emphasizing the significance of the eyes in these people. That tends to suggest that they were different in appearance. Um, what we can also say is that in southeast Turkey, the the Kurdish people, who are the indigenous inhabitants of that region have their own stories about watcher-like beings, and they're called the Peri. That's Peri, and the Peri were these tall, very pale, albino-like beings that were able to interbreed with mortal kind, with our own ancestors, and produce offspring. And that there are remote communities in southeast Turkey, even today, where when somebody's born that's extremely pale skin, with pale hair, possibly with blue eyes, they are seen to be the descendants of the in the you know the connection between the Peri and our own ancestors. So this tells us, as does accounts in the Book of Enoch, that were born that had very pale albino-like complexions, resembled the Watchers themselves. So we can assume that this is how the Watchers looked. And in other words, there was probably a high incidence of albinism amongst these communities. Now, why albinism takes place, we're not sure, but it's a genetic disorder, and it might be linked to hybridization. In other words, we may have inherited some of these genetic traits, or this genetic disorder and the traits relating to them, from this interbreeding that probably goes back as much as 30, 40, maybe 50,000 years ago.
Okay, wow. So you also have a new book that talks about the plasma, and I was going to mention the light ships that people keep seeing, or I guess you would say they are balls of plasma. What is the book that you have, and do you also know if you feel that they are physical, or are they just interdimensional, where they can be touched, but they can also change matter? And I've also seen these crafts, and they will be an orb and then change into a plane, sort of in midair. Have you had any experiences with that? And kind of explain to us about the plasma that you talk
Okay,
about in your new
all
book.
right.
So what's your new
Okay.
book?
Well, look, the book you're talking about is called Light Quest. Light Quest,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a book that examines and goes over a brand new theory to UFOs, and that's the fact that plasma is the key to understanding the manifestation of UFOs, and that these plasma constructs, or plasma light forms, can take on a physicality, so people can touch them. You can see structure within them, um, but that they themselves are the intelligence. In other words, they aren't nuts and bolts spacecraft that come from another planet. They are manifestations into our own space time that exist for a temporary period of time. It could be a matter of seconds, could be a matter of minutes, could even be hours. And that during this time, these plasma almost become like a portal into interdimensional realms uh, that allow these intelligences to manifest within the plasma, and either remain within them as the core intelligence, or even to split away from the plasma form to form what we would know as entities, or probes, or whatever, and that they interact with us, they affect our mind, they can abduct us. That's the other thing. You don't need physical spacecraft for somebody to be abducted. You know, Coming too close to these light forms quite literally takes you out of our normal space time, so that you lose time. It could be a few minutes, it could be half an hour, it could be 3 hours. And there are many accounts from folklore and legends from the past that talk about people missing times after they encounter these light forms and the strange entities that seem to come out of them. Today we would call them the greys, or the aliens, or extraterrestrials. But just a matter of 100 years ago, They were called the little people, or the elves, or the goblins, or the gnomes, or the fairies. And people would see and encounter these, and they would have missing time experiences the same. Sometimes there was a lot of exaggeration. It was said that they would go missing for a year and a day, or they would go missing even for 100 years. But some of the accounts talk about um, periods of like 3 hours going missing after they watched the fairies for what appeared to be something like a few minutes. And they get back to their home, and their wife says, "Where have you been?" And says, "Oh, I watched the fairies, and their strange light." And they said, "Well, you've been missing for 3 hours." So we know that these experiences have been going on for hundreds of years. In fact, I would suggest that they've been going on for many thousands of years. Science will help us understand how these intelligences are able to manifest through plasma into our own dimension. Plasma is the biggest key. I don't think it's the only key. I mean, it may well be that some of these portals don't even need the presence of plasma, but it does seem to be the medium through which these intelligences can manifest and exist whilst they're in our space time, our particular physical world.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. That sounds like a very good book. I look forward to looking at a few of your books.
Yes.
Also, you have something about an expedition that you did, and it connects to a reading with Edgar Casey that he had a reading about the Sphinx, and under the paw that there was a chamber, and in that chamber there was some information and some other explorations you've done that are pretty profound out there. I know you have a CD about some of the caves under that area.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah. Yeah.
explain, what exactly you've done?
Okay. Well, the story for me goes back probably to the mid 1980s when I was actually working with an incredible psychic by the name of Bernard, and he could pick up information about the different scenes and settings of the past, history, and he was a historian and a genealogist, and it helped the work that he did and helped the work that I did with him. But then on one occasion, he had a strange dream that he told me about, where he went to the pyramids of Egypt and saw the Sphinx and felt that he was going underneath the Sphinx into these strange hidden chambers, and that they were connected by long tunnels, and that they were associated possibly with a cave system, and that these had been occupied or used by some kind of culture that pre-existed the pharaohs of Egypt, the dynastic Egyptians. He gave dates. He suggested that um, these caves, these secret chambers, had been in use perhaps around 10,000 BC, and that there'd been some kind of cataclysm, and that they were shut up at that time. Now, this really intrigued me. Obviously, I looked up the works of Edgar Casey, who I knew had mentioned similar structures underneath the Sphinx. He called them the Hall of Records. And it became a lifelong quest to try and see if I could not just find out more information and confirmation of these chambers and caves and tunnels, but also to find the entrance into them. And I was finally able to do this in the year 2008 with a colleague of mine by the name of Nigel Skinner Simpson, a 5 year research project pinned down the exact entrance of these caves in the northwest corner of the Giza Plateau. And we went out there, myself, Nigel, and my former wife went out there in 2008. And we went into a tomb that was also unknown at that time. I mean, other than one vague report from around 1840. and we went into this tomb and eventually found that a crack in the wall that led into a massive cave system that was previously unrecorded. It was not within any book at all on Egyptology or mentioned with any paper, essay, or article, other than in one diary report from a guy called Henry Salt, who had entered into these caves in the year, I think it was 1819. And he gave us just enough information to pin down where to look for them. And we found them, and we entered inside and travelled for some distance. They were full of bats, they were full of poisonous spiders, full of bones and skulls, and to sculpture the chambers into the cave chambers into rooms. And it was very, very exciting. And I wrote a book about this called Beneath the Pyramids, which came out in 2009. So, by all means, check that out. But also, if you want to learn more about the lost caves of Giza, there's a video on YouTube, a full-length video, all about this discovery with reconstructions, the reaction of the Egyptian authorities when they found out. Just go onto YouTube and type in the lost caves of Giza, and you can watch the whole thing there. And nearly 1 million people have watched that video, and that shows the popularity of this subject.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Um, so did you find anything under the Sphinx paw? Is that where that video is? It talks more about that.
Um, the cave system that we found is slightly higher up the plateau, beyond the second pyramid. The area around the Sphinx itself is a bad place to be looking for hidden chambers, because the underlying water table at Giza comes within 2 to 3 meters, probably about, I don't know, 10 to 15 feet of the surface of the Sphinx enclosure. So that if you try and drill down beneath the Sphinx, all you come to is water eventually. A few cavities have been discovered there, but they are probably natural fissures within the rock. They seem to be possibly full of sand, so they've obviously been exposed to the outside world at some point, and sand has got in there. And it's impossible really to investigate beneath the Sphinx. And if you can think back, would our ancestors have put secret chambers beneath the Sphinx very close to the Nile? Because remember, the Nile came right the way up to the edge of the Sphinx, the edge of the plateau in the past. Would they have put hidden chambers where they knew the water table would basically, cover them? I think the answer's unlikely. If they did, then they must have had some kind of technology to shield those chambers from water. But the only chambers that have been found and explored so far, by remote cameras beneath the Sphinx are full of water and full of what appears to be sand, and they do not seem to be artificially constructed.
Okay. Yeah, I had heard that the Temple of Isis, they had dammed and flooded that area, and then cleared the water out, and then rebuilt that, and then eventually put the water back, something of the sort. Which I thought, some of the things that they do, you don't always get the truth from.
Yeah.
So it's good to know what's really going on, and I thank you for all the work that you've done, because that really puts the light on a lot of these topics for people.
True. The Temple of Isis, by the way, was a very late period temple construction, probably around 500 to 600 BC. But there are monuments on Giza that probably do predate the so-called Old Kingdom period when the pyramids themselves were built. The Sphinx probably is older than this period of time. My colleague Robert Schoch obviously has put forward good evidence to suggest this, and I think he's probably right. But the bigger problem is to pin down the exact age of the Sphinx. It could just be a few hundred years older than the pyramids. It could be many thousands of years older. And it's something which we continue to investigate. I've not been back to Egypt since 2009, to be honest. And obviously, there's been a lot of problems out there recently, and it's not made investigation conducive to investigation out there. But I hope to get out there again within the next year to continue some work. So we'll see what happens then. But there are other entrances into the underground cave system, I'm sure of it. But if they're lower down the plateau, they will be filled with water, I'm sure of it.
Your webpage is phenomenal. The information you have, some other great people on there as well, and then you can order your books from there as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, obviously, andrewcollins.com, if anybody wants to check out, my books. And also, we're doing some great tours. In the next few months, we're going out to Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey. We're going there in May. We're going back there in September if you want to come along with us and experience this incredible site, nearly 12,000 years old. We're also going to Peru and Bolivia with the researcher there, Brian Forrester, in June, and that should be great as well. So hopefully see you on some of these tours. And as I said, we should be going back out to Egypt. So come on to andrewcollins.com, subscribe to the e-newsletter that you'll get once a month, that just me telling you, updating you on what's going on. Or contact me through Facebook as well. I'm on there. Follow my work on there as well. And I'll also be happy to hear from anybody if you've got any questions.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I do hope people contact you and with these tours. These seem like such a phenomenal time right now in history. And you guys are breaking through so many walls and discoveries. So it's such an honor to be a part of this. And I thank you for coming on and talking.
It's been my pleasure.